3 weeks had passed since Elliot's birth. 3 magical weeks. I was absolutely delighted in my new role as a mother. I had never felt such an intense happiness in all my life. This new chapter of my story was by far the best. But everything changed the morning I got up for our next appointment at the breastfeeding clinic. It was a real struggle to drag myself out of bed to get ready. Exhaustion had struck me hard, and without warning. I was utterly worn out, and I suddenly felt as if my head was weighed down and my brain was working in slow motion. The visit to the clinic was encouraging. Elliot was still gaining weight at an excellent rate, and they told me I didn't need to come back again. But before we left, I mentioned my concerns to the health consultant. I told her I was finding it difficult to get to sleep and that my mind was running wild, telling me to do anything rather than sleep. Now that I suddenly felt really tired, I wanted to make sure I could get some sleep. What was I to do? She advised me to find somewhere as dark as possible to lie down in, to make sleep easier during the day. I was to avoid all kinds of stimulation. She also suggested a nice glass of warm milk before going to bed to help me get off to sleep. I thanked her for the advice and went home really keen to follow it. And that is what I did. Whenever Elliot was asleep, I forced myself to go to bed with the curtains closed and my computer and music turned off. I didn't always manage to get to sleep, and the glorious sun outside made me want to go out and enjoy the first beautiful days of fall. Nevertheless, I really did feel exhausted. In fact, I felt myself getting weaker and weaker by the day. From time to time, I even noticed my attention span was greatly reduced. Sometimes I had to read an email several times before I really understood what it was saying. The words will dance around in front of my eyes, and my brain would have real difficulty discerning any meaning. And so I turned off my laptop again and attributed this sluggishness simply to fatigue. Then while I was breastfeeding Elliot one evening, I was overwhelmed by a sudden wave of panic. I felt as if I was losing control over my own head. I didn't know if I was even going to be able to finish Elliot's feed, let alone do it all over again in a couple of hours' time. It felt strangely similar to the wave of anxiety which I had felt 2 weeks before in the evening before I'd gone to bed. Except this time around, I couldn't calm down. This only increased my panic, and so I decided to speak to Gerhard about it later on. We decided I really should let one of my midwives know. I dialed the emergency number I'd been given for the pager, and a midwife called me within a couple of minutes. I explained my symptoms, and she tried her best to reassure me, telling me that this kind of anxiety could be normal. I would be able to keep breastfeeding Elliot, even if I had difficulty believing it myself. Speaking to her helped calm me down, but I wasn't convinced she really understood what I was experiencing. The documents we'd had from the midwives after the birth had said that feelings of panic were one of the reasons to make an emergency call. So I wonder why she didn't really seem too concerned. I hung up and hoped that the panic wouldn't resurface. Then one night, when I was breastfeeding Elliot, I had a powerful feeling that God was telling me to write an email to my sister as soon as possible, before the morning. I knew that my sister was going through some difficult times in her life. And so I was convinced I needed to send her a message of support to stop her from committing suicide, which she would never in fact have considered doing. I felt as if the Holy Spirit was urging me to write, and that I had to sacrifice some time for sleep so that I could answer this calling. And that is what I did. In the small hours of the morning, and in spite of my exhaustion, I took my laptop and composed a message of love and support for my sister. I didn't mention my fears that she would kill herself, but I did everything I could for her to know I was thinking of her and praying for her. When I went back to bed, I felt a sense of relief. I had fulfilled God's wishes. But as I fell asleep, I was hoping to receive a reply from my sister the next day to reassure me that the worst had not happened. When she replied to my email during the day, I felt comforted and proud of what I had done for her. The surplus of energy I had felt in the previous weeks had certainly vanished. I was spending more and more time in bed and beginning to find looking after Elliot more and more challenging. Gerhard was a wonderful support to me by cooking all the meals and helping all he could with Elliot. Yet, I didn't feel as if this help or the extra hours of sleep which I was getting were helping me recover or feel any better. On the contrary, I was starting to feel really dizzy when I got out of bed, which stopped me from staying up for very long. Then the panic attacks resurfaced. When they came, I would ask Gerhard to stay close to me and not leave me alone in the room. And as I started to feel better, I would be scared that he would leave the house and that the panic would come back. When he left to go shopping or go to the gym, I would feel a terrible, irrational sense of foreboding that he was going to die in an accident. Although he thought my fears were a little extreme, he would patiently try to reassure me, and he always carried his cell phone with him so I could reach him at any moment. Whenever he came home, a wave of relief came over me as I could be sure that he was still alive. The dizziness and the lightheadedness when I stood up were getting worse. We decided, therefore, to get some advice from a midwife. I spoke to the same woman who had talked to me during my panic attack. From my symptoms, she suspected I might be anemic, and so she advised me to take some iron to feel better. Gerhard went to get what we needed, and I started taking the recommended doses of iron straight away, hoping to see some effect as quickly as possible. My appetite had also diminished over the previous few days. Since giving birth, I had been having a light meal in the middle of the night after Elliot's feed, but I didn't feel like it anymore. Nevertheless, I still forced myself to eat, so I could conserve the energy I needed for breastfeeding. Then one night, I woke up with a terrible headache and a rather alarming throbbing pain in my right thigh. I fed Elliot and forced myself to have something to eat, and then decided to take a Tylenol pill to deal with the headache. But it had absolutely no effect. Since the pain was stopping me from sleeping at all, I decided a little reluctantly to take a second pill. I eventually managed to get back to sleep, although I was still suffering. The same thing happened the next night. The pain kept me awake, and I was starting to worry about it. It crossed my mind that a blood clot might have formed in my thigh, since the pain had moved a little higher up my leg. I told Gerhard about it the next day, and he thought I might be right, because my symptoms were similar to ones which he'd had when he'd been treated for a blood clot in his leg. As I waited for my next appointment at the midwifery clinic, I decided to take some aspirin, as I knew that it thins the blood. My pain was still stopping me from standing up for long. The iron which I was taking didn't seem to be doing much to improve my condition. When Gerhard asked me one evening to help him give Elliot a bath, I got up as best I could, hoping not to feel giddy, but to no avail. I had only been standing up for a few minutes when a wave of dizziness and anxiety came over me. All I could do was go back to bed, walking bent double with my head between my legs. This started to really worry Gerhard, and he began to doubt the information we had got from the midwife we had spoken to. Since he knew that in fact she hadn't yet finished her midwifery training, he decided to contact the clinic directly, hoping to consult Holly for a more experienced opinion on my condition. The secretary took the message down, and we waited for Holly to phone us. While we waited, I lay down on my bed and stayed still, afraid that I will lose consciousness if I try to get up or move. When Holly called, Gerhard put me on the line, and I did my best to describe her what I had been feeling over the previous few days. Something was seriously wrong, and she could sense it. Although I was reluctant to leave the house, she asked me to do my very best to come and see her at the clinic the following day. I told her that I didn't feel strong enough to move, and that I was scared I would faint. Despite my fears, she insisted once again that I come to see her at the clinic. She didn't seem alarmed. Her tone of voice was reassuring, but also firm enough to convince me to come. I was relieved to know that I would be looked after soon. Once the conversation was over, I passed the phone back to Gerhard. He was anxious straight away to know what Holly had said. That was when a terrible wave of dizziness swept over me, so strong that I felt pinned down to the bed, unable to move or even speak. I felt as if madness was overcoming me, as if I was going to lose my mind. I was crippled with fear. Then I saw the panic in Gerhard's eyes. I just about managed to hold my finger up to tell him to wait, and that I would be able to speak in a moment. I was fighting with everything I had to stay conscious and cast off this intense lethargy, which had just taken over my body and left me unable even to speak. It was such an awful feeling. At that very moment, Elliot started crying for me to feed him. With immense difficulty, I signaled to Gerhard to bring him to bed next to me. Gerhard unbuttoned my shirt to allow Elliot to feed. Fortunately, he was quite used to feeding while lying down at my side. He stopped crying as soon as he had one of my nipples in his mouth. The sense of calm which he was giving off in spite of my inner turmoil and distress was reassuring and really good for me. After a few minutes, I managed to come to my senses, and eventually I could communicate the gist of my conversation with Holly, speaking slowly, one sentence at a time, and pausing regularly. Gerhard seemed satisfied with what she had said. Just like me, he was really keen to hear a second opinion on my condition. That evening, just like the previous few evenings, Gerhard didn't leave the house at all. I could see how worried he was by my condition. Yet I could also understand that he needed to get out, to take his mind off things and relieve some of the stress from the last few days. But I couldn't contemplate being left alone with Elliot, even just for an hour. Gerhard could see this, and besides, he would never have been comfortable leaving me alone in this state. The next morning, I managed to get up, have a bath, and get ready for the midwifery clinic without too much difficulty. In the car on the way there, I made sure to stay hunched over to avoid feeling too dizzy. In the waiting room, I remained in a similar position as I waited for Holly to call us into her office. When she saw me, she knew straight away that something wasn't right. Although she was concerned, her demeanor was calm and composed. I don't have a clear memory of everything that happened at that appointment. Gerhard told me afterwards that I had behaved uncharacteristically and erratically. I was in a good mood initially, but quickly became anxious. I was talking fine, and then a sudden dizziness took hold of me, and I needed to lie down on the sofa to calm down. I remember describing the symptoms I'd had over the previous few days and asking Holly for advice about my condition. She replied that she would have liked to give an opinion, but she wasn't sure. And in fact, she wasn't in a position to diagnose me, and she wasn't a doctor. I was suddenly terrified by the idea that it might be cancer. Holly was as reassuring as possible, and told me she felt it would be best to make an appointment with my family doctor. If I couldn't get one within 2 days, I should consider going to the ER. She told me I shouldn't put up with this suffering for much longer. I should get some help so I could make the very most of this precious time with my baby without having to worry. So we left the clinic, planning to make an appointment as soon as possible with my family doctor, who was a French-speaking nurse practitioner. As soon as I got home, I phoned the medical clinic, only to be told that she no longer worked there, and that another doctor wasn't available for an emergency appointment for the next 3 days. Immediately, I felt that this was too long to wait. As I hung up, I decided with Gerhard to go to the emergency right away. I didn't feel well at all, and I wanted some help as quickly as possible. Gerhard was concerned that there might be a long wait at the emergency, but I preferred to go to hospital straight away, rather than risking turning up at a walk-in clinic just to be told that I needed to be seen at hospital.